Assalomu alaykum. Hurmatli tadbir ishtirokchilari. O'ylaymanki barcha yoqimli tushlikdan keyin joylarni egallashdi. Demak, kun tartibi bo'yicha davom etamiz. Bunda boya aytib o'tganimizdek, professor Vitorining navbatdagi taqdimotlari aynan ta'limda sifat va uning ko'rsatkichlari bo'yicha bo'ladi. Agar savollar bo'ladigan bo'lsa, takliflar bo'ladigan bo'lsa, bemalol chatda yozishingiz mumkin yoki mikrofonni yoqib fikr bildirishingiz mumkin bo'ladi. Professor, marhamat, so'z sizga.
All right. I hope you are all back. You never know with those black screens. So, because I don't have an opportunity to have lunch with you, maybe before I go into quality and quality indicators, could you share with me a bit of what typical Uzbek dishes are? So what is it you typically have for lunch? So I can be a bit more envious and think even more about doing that next time in person. So what is typical for food in Uzbekistan? And through this, I will also realize how many of you have really returned from the lunch break already. Just, you can tell me, you can post it, whatever you feel, but it would be good to learn a bit about what you're eating. All right. Good, thank you. Okay, good, thank you. Your interpreter explains to me a bit about what the dishes are about. That's why I'm so intently listening. And all the others were just fasting? I can't believe that. You must have had something to eat. All right. I do know pilaf, but I've never had Uzbek pilaf. What I did realize though is when the 2 times I was in Kazakhstan, I have never eaten so much horse meat in my life before. Right, thank you. All right, if we have time, of course, by the time we finish, you're going into the weekend and I have my lunch break. I'm going to share with you a few of the things we're eating here in Austria. Good. Food is all about quality, and we have our own mechanisms. We have our own mechanisms of detecting that. And of appreciating good food and finding out what is quality food. And I think most of us are actually really experts in detecting what is high quality food and what is not. Of course, it's a matter of taste, but overall, I think most of us would be able to agree. It's a bit more complicated when we're not talking about food, but when we're talking about the quality of teaching and learning. Now, my background is, my professional background, not academic background, is very much in quality assurance. So that's where I started in, and I still, as Dean of Accreditation and Quality Management, it's still part of my responsibilities. So I'm very used to talking about quality assurance, but usually it's instruments and processes and systems and how all of those things work together. I don't want to bore you with this because I always felt there's too many workshops talking about processes and systems of quality assurance, and they're interesting for experts on quality assurance, but no one else is interested in it. So instead of talking about this, I would rather talk about indeed indicators of quality. And let me just see. I promise you it's the last couple of slides for not only for today, but of this workshop with me. So, oh no, before we go there, you see this empty canvas. Yeah, because that's the thing everything starts with. What is quality about? Yeah, and we can't talk about indicators of quality before we a bit understand what quality is about. Or we go just through the indicators and try to understand it this way. So could you again, and I'm sorry, I can't let you off the hook yet. Could you again share with me a bit of what is quality for you? So what quality of your own education, quality of teaching and learning, how do you see that it is of a high quality? What is a quality indicator for you? With food, I think we could easily agree, but what is it when it comes to teaching and learning? Could you share with me again in the chat, what is quality for you? And this time I'm looking for at least 8 answers. I know it's an almost philosophical question, so you might want to think about it a bit harder. But then just let me know, if you think about what is quality, how do you recognize something is of good quality when it comes to teaching and learning? And then please just share with me and the others. And I know that some of you are still secretly finishing your lunch. That's fine. Keep the cameras off, but just try to do some typing competence. Okay, thank you. What else? It's a very long answer and I will need my interpreter again. Okay, thank you. Now I got the translation. So it's again very much about the competence of the teachers and their knowledge base and their skills. What else is quality of teaching and learning for you? All right, performance upon expectations, above expectations, agreed, good. All right, that's a very interesting answer, thank you. Oh, but you must have thought about this before. Thank you. But to all the others, I mean, it can't be that you've never thought about what quality of your own teaching means for you, or quality of what happens in your classroom. So right. Good. So that is a very much an outcome-oriented perspective. Fit for purpose, fit for the labor market. Good. the teacher providing. All right, this is also about competence and skills development, but by the students. I'm waiting for at least 2 more. I can be so patient. Because for me personally, quality is very often about meeting the goals you have set for yourselves. And as my goal was a minimum of 8, for me, this will now be an indicator of the quality of our time together. Okay, good. I can do that all day.
Marhamat, kimda taklif bo'ladigan bo'lsa, bemalol mikrofonni yoqib aytishingiz mumkin, agar yozishda muammo bo'layotgan bo'lsa.
Okay, we haven't seen that yet. Thank you. Good. Adaptability, thank you. All right, now you're off the hook. And you will all be so relieved once this is over. And then you can complain to the Erasmus office in Uzbekistan and say, please never invite an expert again who's making us do all this typing. Good. Thank you for all your answers. I think what we see here is that, and this is not very much of a surprise. Quality means a lot of different things for different people. There is a big discourse out there on what is quality when it comes to education and higher education. And there is, some of you might be aware of it, there's even some international academic journals on. One of them is called Quality in Higher Education. It's a journal where I'm also a member of the International Editorial Board. There's quality assurance in education. And when you take a look at this, this is the one question that has not been satisfyingly resolved yet. So you see in literature, most experts agree, oh, quality is relative, it's subjective, it depends on the context, it depends on the circumstances, it depends on the values. So most scholars agree that it is it's complex and it's very much depending on the observer. Now, this is nice from an academic point of view, but of course, when it comes to the classroom, that's not helping us. It's helping us that we know that it's relative and that people have very different viewpoints, but it's very difficult to translate that into some kind of practice. Now, if you take a deeper look, and some of those things you have seen already, if you take a deeper look into research and answers on what is quality for students, for employers, for institutions, for teachers, these are just a couple of answers that you will find in previous research, but also in practice. So we've also already heard from some of you, from one of you, going beyond the expectations. So excellence is something that, and I'll talk about that a bit later again, excellence is something that very often comes up. You excel, you go beyond the expectations or beyond the normal standards, And that's where you see quality. There's others who argue that quality is very much about perfection, or that it is about customer satisfaction. Now, this comes obviously from industry and from companies, but there's a lot of people out there who say quality you realize when you have satisfied students, when you have satisfied graduates, when you have satisfied teaching staff, and we try to grasp it through surveys, through satisfaction surveys. Personally, I'm not a big fan of that, but it is a very, very strong notion on the discourse. Fulfillment of criteria in a way, or fulfillment of a goal in a way that what I have been doing with you now, saying if my criterion is it's a quality interactive experience, if we have at least eight contributions, that would be quality as fulfillment of criteria. Now we can easily agree this is not helpful as well, because it depends on the criteria. We could say, if I would have said 3 contributions are enough, that's not very much. If I would have sent 25, I think I would be waiting until tomorrow before we get the 25. So that very much depends on the criteria. And many of you rightfully would argue, I was not a quality interaction because I got 8 contributions on the chat. Yeah, and you would be right about that. But still, you have a lot of schools of thought that go in this direction. Quality about fitness for purpose. This is very much about what you have written in the chat on the students developing skills that are needed by the labor market. We've heard today from the rector about, again, about the agenda in Uzbekistan. A lot of that is also about defining a purpose, and the institutions and programs would need to adapt to that, would need to fit in that. Value for money. For those of us who are in the private sector, where students pay for it, or where student fees are a big important thing, this is a big issue. More and more, we've now heard that it is one of the national goals to bring Uzbek higher education institutions on the agenda of the big ranking institutions, make them appear in the ranking tables. So arguably, it's a success factor. It's something that more and more is something where institutions or countries show that they're doing good, that their systems are doing well with the use of rankings or international accreditations or audits or wherever it would be. So there's a lot of different viewpoints on quality, and this makes our discussion today a bit difficult, because I could talk to you about indicators on quality a lot. But would that be your indicators? Would that be the indicators relevant for your institution? That's already a very complicated thing. So I'm sorry, I will make you later work again, because defining your own quality indicators is a very important thing. I can just try to inspire some thoughts on that. But what makes the picture even more complicated is that it's very much matter of perspective. So, and that's what we see a lot when we go inside higher education institutions. It's not just a personal matter, but you can very often group the understanding, the quality indicators by perspective, by stakeholder group. Now, if we start with the students, if we talk to students in most countries, very typical answers would be, especially in those systems where they have to pay for it, for students, value for money is important. If they pay study fees, it's important they get a degree that they can later also bank on in their own career. They want the feeling that they get something out for their money. This has been a big issue in Austria. We basically have no tuition fees still for public university students. Yeah? And when I say no, then it's really a very tiny sum compared to the average income in Austria. So a typical student, most students get exceptions. They don't have to pay any tuition fees, but if they do, then it's not more than 720 euros per year, which compared to US universities in Asia is really, really a very tiny sum. But still, until 10 years ago, there were no tuition fees at all. All higher education in Austria was free. There was no fees. And even with this tiny fee, students suddenly started to make demands on education and on the administration, because now that they were paying for it, they expected service to be quicker, they expected classroom teaching to be a bit more innovative, they expected their education to be more valuable on the labor market. This is a big thing. So for many students, it is all about good job prospects. So for them, the quality of teaching and learning has less to do with what you do in the classroom and more to do with what happens afterwards, what happens in their career. Do they get a good job? Do they get a well-paid job? Do they even get a job? This is sometimes tricky for higher education institutions, because very often also politicians are confusing that. If higher education graduates get a job, is only partly due to their education. It has a lot to do with the labor market and the economy. If the economy is soaring, then graduates will get great jobs and better paid jobs. If the economy has a problem, then you basically have an employability problem. So it's not so easy, but from a student's viewpoint, that is very often an issue. And then, of course, they want excellent teachers. Now, we will see a bit later what for students, because that's what I want to focus on today, what for students are excellent teachers, but they want teachers who they feel are competent. And you have written that in the chat yourself, competence plays a big role. Now, this is the students. Let's go to the academics, to the teachers and to the researchers. And if we take a look at their typical answers, what very often researchers and academics understand as quality is autonomy. So being able to decide themselves for what they teach, what they do research, being autonomous about spending their time. So no regulations, no administration interfering too much with what they're doing, leaving them to decide for themselves. And this is an interesting but very typical understanding of quality. Yeah. What is a quality institution? One where you don't get handled all the time by decision makers, where you have a lot of freedom. And of course, and that's true for most countries, again, I don't know about how much time you have for research. I've heard about your national agenda today to boost that, but very often academics are, or more and more often, they understand themselves as researchers first and then as teachers. So support and funding for research and time for research is a big quality indicator for them. And the problem is we often overlook that. We talk about quality of teaching and learning, but people are wearing more hats than one. So if you talk to a typical faculty member, an academic, about quality, it might not be the first thing that comes into their mind, what happens in the classroom. It's about how they spend the rest of their time. And of course, excellent students. Now you already see there's a big difference in perspectives. The students want excellent teachers, the teachers want excellent students, and both of them would not be completely sure what they mean by that. And what about education managers, deans, program directors, rectors, vice rectors? Well, if you talk to them about quality, they are not that occupied with what happens in the classroom. They might not even think about what the students and the teachers understand, but what they need is good ranking positions. They want effective and efficient processes, because it's also about money. And they want external recognition through those rankings, through an award, I've seen universities who were translating their strategic objectives. And when they were operationalizing their objectives, it was basically, we want an award, we want a positive recommendation, we want a better ranking position. This is what happened out of the strategic goal. So this is a very, very different perspective from the teachers and student perspective. But these are also the people who set the policies for teaching and learning and set the conditions and set the infrastructure. So it's actually important that those different stakeholder groups, and I've not even talked about employers or the government or the parents of the students or NGOs, NPOs, civil society, what they want, what they see as quality. And the difficult thing is that very often those groups don't get together and come to a common understanding. So this is a very tricky issue, as I said. Now, why does it matter? because you are also used to that. When we talk then about quality assurance, what we want to avoid is what happens in this cartoon. So this would be, I mean, it's not an education institution, but you understand the joke. This is the person responsible for quality control. And because his mechanism is to, because his understanding of quality is how well are those glass bottles withstanding a fall, how unbreakable they are. He's breaking all of them in his processes of quality assurance. Now, this sounds like a joke, but very often I've seen that before, the instruments we use for quality assurance. And that's why it's so important to talk about the indicators first and not about the instruments. Very often those instruments affect the quality of what we're doing. The questions you pose in a survey for students or in an evaluation survey, if this is used also for the career of teachers or part of their salary, as we see in some Anglo-Saxon universities, then of course the teachers are going to make sure that they get good results. But this means they cater to the process of quality assurance, not necessarily to what happens or what would need to happen for the students to learn. And that's a difficult thing. So it matters because with the instruments and processes we use for ensuring and improving quality, we should make sure that we're not damaging the quality after all. And for this, we again need to understand a bit better about what the different stakeholder groups understand by it. And the other thing is because we want to avoid feeling like this little guinea pig. Yeah, you know this hamster wheel. So this poor little animal is running in the hamster wheel all the time. And very often we shouldn't forget, depending on what we understand by quality, it means we're also running in that hamster wheel all the time. There's a very famous organization, psychologist, with the name of Carl Weick. I don't know if some of you know him. He became particular famous for his theories and work on sense making, for example. And he also did some work on quality and quality management. And because he's a psychologist and he tries to understand and see things a bit differently than in mainstream, one of his papers was about how difficult the idea of continuous improvement is and what it does to the motivation of people. Because from a certain viewpoint, continuous improvement, continuous quality development means it's never enough. Whatever you're doing, it's never good enough, because that's what the idea of continuous improvement signals. And again, it's very important to understand first where we want to go. Yeah, and this now leads back to my very unsophisticated and insufficient indicator of getting 8 contributions, but at least there's a clear goal after which we say, okay, we've achieved it. Yeah, no one is claiming it's a good quality indicator, but if the goal would be about a constant increase of interactivity, what would that mean? And would 100 contributions even be good enough for that? So this is a big issue, and we would like to avoid running in this little hamster wheel. And this is ending the more abstract part, but I think it's important in terms of an introduction to understand what I'm getting at the second part. What counts as an improvement for whom and under what circumstances is also very much a relative thing. If you change as a teacher, I've seen that myself as a teacher. When I was teaching, I did a lot of classes with homework assignments where students had to write an essay basically every week. And then, of course, I had to provide feedback for that. And then afterwards, you ask students about the feedback. And you know what you get as feedback? Part of them say, that was good. I liked it the way it was. Part of them say, far too many assignments. We had too little time. You need to change that. Part of the students said, well, you know, it was all right, but it was not really demanding. We would actually have preferred some longer essays or something because that was not demanding enough. Okay. Part of them, I've been teaching a lot on the weekends because when I was teaching, I'm having a management job, so very often I can't do the teaching during the week. So I'm used to teach blocked seminars during the weekend. And when I was doing that, half of the students were saying, that's great. We enjoyed having that on the weekends. Blocked seminars worked very well. We have to work during the week as well. That worked well. And the other half of the students were saying, well, you know, that was not working at all. I would have preferred having this course once a week, every Wednesday, because that would have been best. So what do you do as a teacher with this kind of feedback? I could move it to Wednesdays. That would be an improvement for some, but it would mean getting worse for others. So we very often have to be very reflective about what it is. Yeah. Does it mean striving towards an absolute goal? Does it mean towards a relative goal? I've heard some very wise people arguing that if things are getting more difficult all the time, because there's more and more demands, let's just take the pandemic as an example, then keeping the same standard where the conditions, while the conditions are actually getting worse, is an improvement already. And this is a very interesting thought. So these are all things that from a, I wouldn't go so far and say philosophical point of view, but from a reflective and conceptual point of view, we need to keep in mind when we talk about quality and quality indicators and teaching and learning. So before going into a more concrete part of it, any immediate reactions from you? So would you agree? Would you disagree? Are there any questions at this point? Don't worry, I'm not going to count reactions now, but if you give me some indication if you could follow and if you agree or disagree, that would be very helpful for the second part. Good. All right, this is the question on the indicators and categories of quality. I'll come to that in a moment, but I'll keep that question in mind. All right, thank you. Good, thank you. Now this was the more abstract part. Let's get a bit, very good, thank you. Let's get a bit more concrete in that. And what I would like to share with you here and now is, as I said, starting with the students, some student conceptions of teaching and learning. And it's actually based on I rarely talk about my own research in those workshops, but this is something we did and we found very useful. It's what I did with a colleague of mine a couple of years ago, and we're now repeating it after the pandemic, where we were doing research on what students understand as excellent teaching. So basically, what are the quality indicators of students? Because we always felt it's good to talk with teachers what are quality indicators for them, but it's actually the learners, remember yesterday, that go through the experience. So what is it that is actually important to the students? And we did not just ask them for that. Yeah, so we did not just do an interview with 20 or 30 students, and we did also not just do a survey, because this is always a very artificial thing. You ask students and you give them some choices and then they choose something, but this might not come from themselves. And when you do an interview, and I like working with interviews, you get the viewpoint of 10 students, but that's not really that much to work with. But what we have at my university, we have several teaching awards. So we have a teaching award for innovative teaching, and we have a teaching award for excellent teaching. And when it comes to the award for excellent teaching, every year the students at my university within a certain time frame can nominate teachers which they feel are very excellent. And they can do that. They can do that through our learning platform, and they can nominate up to 2 teachers, but they have to give a bit of reasoning why they're nominating these teachers. So it's not just enough to give a name, but you also have to give reasons why you think this teacher deserves this award for excellence in teaching. And it's a very successful thing. We get I think last year, for the first time, we got more than 4,000 students doing the nominations, which is pretty big. So they really care about this. We get up to, and then we get about up to 1,000 teachers who are nominated. But for this research, what we did, we also got through this about 4,000, almost 5 years ago, it was a bit less. So between 3,000 and 4,000 reasonings, argumentations from students why they think these persons deserve it. And this was a great window of opportunity to understand a bit better what makes good teaching for the students. So we were coding all of those 3,000 plus answers of the students. Many of them were writing small texts where you find several reasons and motives and indicators, and we tried to restructure them. If you're interested in that, I can also put it on a reading list. We published that a couple of years ago. And for us, there was a very interesting thing. Why? Because we found very, very different reasonings, very different patterns by the student. A very important one was the actor-oriented pattern. That was very much focused on the person of the teacher. Yeah, and I'll get back later a bit what that meant in detail. But this was very clearly, it was not about the didactics, it was not about the setup, it was not about the teaching rooms, which sometimes also can happen, but it was very much about the person of the teacher. Of course, you can argue this is what happens if you ask people to nominate a person, but very many of those reasonings were tied to the person. Now, we also got a lot of interesting answers that were not actor-oriented, but action-oriented. So here it was not about some personal traits of the teacher, who they are and how they are, but what they were doing, how they were behaving, how they were doing things. And this is different because, and we will see that later, this means, you can't change the fact you're either humorous or you're not humorous. And this is also a matter of perspective. Sometimes I feel I'm hilarious and a very funny person, but most people in my environment heartily disagree. They don't think I'm funny at all. So, but you can't change that about yourself. But what you do and how you teach, this you can very much change. So that was very important. And there were others that were not about the behavior and how they were reacting towards students, but really about the process. So the students there were actually focusing on the delivery of the teaching. And this is very much about didactics and the teaching design. So in many cases, students were not just giving arguments about the person, but about the design of the course, which is even more interesting because I'm working at a university where sometimes the design of the course has been developed by a different person than the one who is actually teaching the course. Some of them in their answers were focusing on the outcome, on the impact the teacher or the teaching had on student learning. And last but not least, and that was the smallest pattern, the smallest group, but still we had several codes focusing on the resources used. So the students thinking teaching was good because of the teaching materials. And this is something that's also why we want to repeat this research, because we feel 5 years later after the pandemic, 6 years later almost, the answers might be different because now teaching materials might have gotten even more important. So let's take a closer look at what students mean when they talk about these actor-oriented patterns. And obviously, and these again are the things that are very difficult to change, but these are clear quality indicators from the students on what the teachers need to do in order for them to perceive them as good teachers. And some of those things we will not be too happy about. Yeah, I've seen teachers very much struggling with the notion that they need to be an entertainer. So because what students and the majority of students found is if the teacher was humorous, if they were telling anecdotes, if they were making students laugh, they felt this was a big part of success. Now, we might struggle with this or we might not struggle with this, but some other researchers at our university are currently doing some research on the role of humor when it comes to successful teaching. So is humor able to actually tell, help students learn a bit better. And there is research out there that shows that humor helps students to actually digest content a bit better. So it's not just about preferences, but this was a very clear quality indicator. And we might overlook that when we talk about quality indicators. What was also a very important pattern, and those two patterns actually go hand in hand, the teacher as a mentor, as a friend, or the teacher as a motivator. So being perceived as nice and friendly, as patient, as helpful, as understanding, as caring. For students, this, if you take a look, and this is actually ranked by the number of codes we had, by the number of students that were participate, or that we could group into a pattern. Expertise, and I'll talk to that in a few seconds. Expertise is important for students, but these whole issues, humor, being perceived as understanding, being perceived as caring, motivating, inspiring, for them, these were the more relevant quality indicator than actually the actual competence as an expert in their field. And that kind of makes us think, doesn't it? Teacher as expert, expertise in a subject, expertise in teaching, appearing experience, professional experience, experience from outside of the classroom. These were all very clear things. You've written that in the chat yourselves, and that's pretty, I think that for us as experts, as academics, that's the natural, that's what we think we bring to the table anyway. But the other parts, showing that you're passionate about what you do, showing that you love the subject, showing enthusiasm, which again also works as a motivator, and all those things about showing students that you really want them to succeed, and this is not something that we think about at first. So this is what we learned when it comes to the actor-oriented. When it comes to the action-oriented patterns, we again found four very important, four dominant patterns. One is the skills, the explanatory skills. Teachers who know how to explain things. So for students, they perceive a teacher as good, they perceive teaching as high quality if the teacher is able to answer their questions. But it doesn't mean that they need to answer all the questions and are an expert in everything, but they need to react to all the questions and at least explain to them where they find things. Provide examples. So the better teachers are in providing an example for what they're talking about, the more they can draw from examples from their own experience, from their own life, from things they have done, the better students perceive this as effective teaching. And of course, if the explanations are clear and comprehensible. If they support student learning, so if they offer, for example, and I've not added examples, but of course, students were giving us examples. If teachers offer, for example, additional meetings for students who are failing or lagging behind, if teachers are offering additional mentoring, if they really try to help students understand by being patiently helping even those who are slower. If students feel that the teachers care about or find ways of making all of them achieve the learning goals, instead of just setting the goals and letting the students do themselves, then for them, this is very much about excellence in teaching and high quality teaching. And now, and that for us came as a surprise, even as researchers, there were several students for whom the services provided by the teachers were a clear indicator of quality of teaching. Now, of course, this correlates very strongly with support and with being caring, but none of us would think that providing copies of learning materials, instead of asking the students to copy them themselves, would be something that is perceived as high quality teaching. But for students, obviously, it plays a role. And the other aspect on, for example, fast feedback or fast answers on email, in some of our academic units, they have now started to set up a rule. You answer the emails of your students within 48 hours at the latest. And very obviously, this works and is again perceived as a quality indicator. And again, this has nothing to do with how you teach or how you explain things. This is more about how you approach this in general. And grading and feedback, I can touch upon a bit more briefly because we've already talked about it a lot. But providing feedback without being called for is a big issue for students. Very often teachers, as we have discussed yesterday, wait for students to collect the feedback. But for students, it's very important that the teachers push the feedback. This is something that they perceive as a quality indicator in that regard. Now, the last three patterns were less strongly, as I already explained, so I can go through them a bit more quickly. When it comes to resource orientation, the quality of the teaching material, obviously, provision of additional materials, so not just the textbooks and textbook, but additional links, further reading material, additional videos, the diversity of material. The less diverse the material is, if it's only texts you provide with students, they might not feel you're a teacher who is caring. If you provide texts, videos, podcasts, different types of text, and you provide it really, so you don't just let it to the students to do that, that's a service in terms of resources which they appreciate very much and regard as an aspect of high quality teaching. And the appropriate usage of teaching material. Just putting it out there is not what students are expecting. Resources need to be connected. Just remember what we're talking about in terms of the flipped classroom yesterday. If you just leave them with the material, then they might be overcrowded. Or remember the cognitive load theory. If you provide them with guidelines, if you provide them with the structure on how to use those materials, then it will be much more effective. What I'm still sometimes struggling with is what students then have understood under outcome-oriented, in their outcome-oriented pattern. So if they feel they have been successful in their learning, if they feel they have learned something. Now, this is very subjective, and that's very difficult for the teachers to influence. On the other hand, it's not. Just remember the techniques I showed you yesterday, some examples like the minute paper or the Matthias point or something like this. If you make students reflect, and we also, please remember, reflexivity was something we discovered is a key of effective learning, then you can influence their subjective competence and their feeling. If you ask them regularly to think about what they have learned and to assess their progress of learning, then students will give that a bit more deeper thinking. They will realize that they have learned something and they will be more satisfied. So even though this is more abstract, as a teacher, you can still influence that. And when it comes to the process-oriented, to the more didactic part, that is what you find usually in workshops on good teaching. You don't find tips on how to structure materials, that you need to copy the material, that you need to do those reflective exercises with the student, because for them, that's good teaching. But what you find in all those workshops is how to structure your courses, what you have as teaching methods, that you should vary those teaching methods, how you do a lecture, how you captivate students with a lecture, how you do the interactive formats in the course, and how you actually raise student contributions. One of the reasons why I like to share this with you and discuss it with you is because part of my message, and going back, is again, if you see this huge list of things that those 3,000 plus students saw as important for quality teaching and quality learning, the didactic elements, structuring of courses, variation of methods, is by far the smallest part. So it also makes us think, whenever we're talking about didactics and methods, we might want to think about it more holistically. And yeah, that's the reason why I was sharing, and think about what is important for students. Of course, we need to have good didactics and pedagogy. I'm a big advocate of that. But we might need to take a bit of a broader perspective in order to get there. Good. And rounding that up, and rounding up also what these long talks I'm having, instead of you going into a discussion with me, there's a very, very big project called Performance. It's a project that is involving more than 10 countries, involving countries like Georgia and Azerbaijan, but also Austria, Portugal, Hungary. It's a big project that the EU Commission commissioned on trying to improve and also assess higher education teachers' performance. I've also put the link in the slide down there. And the reason why I'm sharing this is because this project has also a lot of additional information and additional initiatives in order to improve teaching. But one of the things we did in this project, and I'm involved as an external consultant in it, especially when it comes to the competence assessment of the teachers, what we did is come up, or what the project group did is come up with concrete indicators and concrete assessment indicators through which students, but also teachers themselves or the supervisors of teachers would actually assess the competence, the quality of teaching of a certain teacher. And if you take a look at these 6 areas, then again, you see that the project group came up with things that go far beyond what we usually understand as teaching, namely the things happening in the classroom. This here, teaching performance and student-teacher interactions, this is usually what we regard as what as the important thing for quality teaching and what happens for quality teaching. But this teaching performance is only one of 6 areas. Teachers have a variety of roles in institutions. Developing a course, developing a curriculum is a big part of their competence and will have a bigger influence sometimes on the learning of students than the actual performance in the classroom. Student assessment we've talked about yesterday, a very big area, an area on itself. This is an area where a lot of quality indicators of what makes a good assessment can be discussed separately from what we have been discussing today. And the other areas also show how broad it is. Organizational and administrative tasks, we usually don't see that as an indicator for the quality of teaching, but hopefully you've also seen that through the research I was sharing with you before. For students, they also have a holistic view on that. They don't just see the teaching performance in the classroom, they see everything around it as well. So organization, administration, but also the perceived competence of teachers when it comes to their research, or how interested they are into bringing that research into society or making something out of it, being innovative. These are all aspects for them related to quality. Good. Let me stop here for a moment and also disclosing to you that as far as the input goes, at least the input I've prepared for you, this is what I wanted with you to share, but we're not done yet. We have more than an hour to go. But before we move forward, I just wanted to ask you, if you let that sink in, is there anything you would like me to explain a bit more in detail? Is there anything that was unclear to you? Or is there anything you would like to add to what I was talking? And Gunora, I see your question about the nomination. I'll take that up in a few moments, but I'll first see if there's other questions popping up related to the content I was sharing. And again, I'm giving you the time. I might not be humorous, but I can be patient. So I can at least tick one of those items off the list.
Thank you for your interesting presentation. And I have some questions.
Please
Could
do,
I ask?
Yes, please do.
You said before that your competitiveness of the teacher, the students can assess in the how he or she conduct the lessons, yes?
Right.
And I have it's my question about connecting with how students can assess the teachers, and if they give the answer will be don't such as trustly, what will be there, and how? And second question, it's how we can improve the competitiveness of the teachers? Do you have a certain methods of this situation? What do you
Good.
say?
Good, thank you. These are two very good questions. Thank you for them. The first question is, I mean, this is raised in very, very often. Are students actually competent to assess the competency of the teacher? And I would argue yes and no. Because if it is less about the teacher, but about the learning, students are, of course, competent to assess, are they able to learn in that class? Is it working for them? Are they feeling well in that class? Are they feeling appreciated? And of course, they're also able to form a link and say, has this to do anything with the teacher? So I do believe students are more than capable from a certain perspective to assess what is happening in the classroom, and if they're learning something, and if what the teachers are doing, if they feel what the teachers are doing in terms of explanation is working for them. As I said, this may differ among different students, but they're capable of doing that. Why I said yes and no is I don't believe that we should ever come to the conclusion students have the full picture and they're the only ones who are able to assess them. That's why performance is just one example where we work with a multiple perspective approach. But at my own university, when it's about quality assurance of teaching, we always try to involve different perspectives. So it's never just the students. If we try to develop something or get a full picture, you might know the expression 360-degree feedback. Yeah. It's normally being done in a corporate context for leaders or for development, for staff development. But I'm a big believer in that we need to, because quality is so relative and depending on the perspective, we need instruments where we have different perspective assessing the competency of a teacher. And I'll come to your second part of the question in a moment. And this gives us a fuller picture, but it also makes sure that the teachers are not blindly just catering to what the students were telling them. Yeah, that's why for us, we have also a lot of time and effort invested into peer feedback among teachers, because of course, other teachers and experts from the same field can assess more easily if you're competent in your field. Students will only see if they think you're a competent expert in the field, but they can't really assess it, but your peers can. Students will also not be able to assess pedagogy. They can only assess the effects of pedagogy because they have also not learned about pedagogy. But these effects they can assess. So this plays a big role there. And the second thing, your second question was about what can we do in order to raise the competence. And this now is tricky because it's very much depends on culture. That's what I've learned. This is also an intercultural thing. There are some countries where top-down works very well. There are other countries where, like in Germany or and also in Austria, where the individual professors are always like gods by themselves, and no one who is demanding anything from top down can get through this. So this is a very tricky issue. I can only answer with how we try to solve it for ourselves, but this might not work in every other culture. And if you need more examples, I can share some examples from other institutions. But when it comes to teacher staff development, my core philosophy is that we should not talk about the teacher's competence. If we offer staff development courses about the teacher's competence, no one comes. For two reasons. The more mature, the more experienced faculty members feel offended that anyone could be doubting their experience and competence because they're great. And the others are a bit afraid of showing that they're not feeling competent by showing up at those staff development things. So what we did instead is we tried to find formats and solutions that overcome that and doesn't make it a personal deficit of the teacher. So what I'm getting at is our framing is it's not a deficit of the person. That's why if we offer staff development or coaching, it's always about the course design or the program design or a teaching process or a teaching method or something there, because with this, our teachers can live. It's not about themselves. It's about the design of the course. And of course, you want feedback and input on that, because this has nothing to do with them not being experts in it. And we feel through this little twist, for us, our staff development with teachers works far better, because we don't step on their toes by consciously or unconsciously signaling that we don't think them competent. But as soon as we started offering it in these kind of ways, teachers were far more willing to come to us. And the other thing is, teachers never have time. Yeah, we all have never time. So what we try to do is find formats and solutions that are dealing with this problem of time. This teaching and learning academy I was talking about with you yesterday, where everything is put online and all those materials are online. A lot of those materials are actually things that the teachers just need to download, and they can work with it in their classes. So staff development or staff support for us also means we know that teachers have too little time and they don't want to attend a 2-day workshop. So we offer them only very short and very condensed workshops. We offer them very, very concise inputs, very often not more than 1 or 1.2 hours. This they can fit into it more easily. As we have learned yesterday, there's only so much you can learn anyway in one sitting. And a lot of the resources are there for them on demand, and they can do that in their own time, in their own thing. And then we realized sometimes 1 hour is not enough. And then we realized we need to find some additional incentives. So for example, when we want to develop an entire program and we want the teachers from that program go together and work on that program, we can't just make a workshop of half a day. Again, not all the teachers are going to turn up, they don't like that. But our teachers or our academics like to go on research retreats, for example. So they go with their academic unit and start talking about their research and share the research and share the collaboration. So we thought, if this works for research, why not for teaching? So what we offer in these cases is we offer them a retreat away from the university. It's in a nice little seminar hotel or something. They're there for 1.5 days. We pay for the overnight stay, we pay for the travel, but in those 1.5 days, they have to work on the program and on the courses. And again, that works far better, because now they all have an excuse to do that for 2 days. If it's integrated in everyday life, they don't have time. If we make it a special event, most of them will make the time. So these are just 3 very brief examples of how we try to overcome that problem, that teaching staff is not always happy to be developed. And ultimately, it's them developing themselves, not us developing them. So we just need to offer the right formats through which they can do that. Well, Laura, that was a very long answer. I'm sorry for being carried away, but I hope it was helpful.
No, thank you very much. But I want to continue the second question. If I ask, you have said that we can assessment the students competitive by some indicators.
Right.
What about the teacher? Can we assessment the competitiveness of the teacher and how we can find the lack of the competitiveness? How?
Right.
This one.
Right. I think we can. Yeah, and there's a lot of literature out there. Again, this is at the heart of this performance project I was talking about. So the first pilot, the project has been working on exactly this: assessment items for the competences of teachers in different areas of their teaching. So I think they will need 2 or 3 months before they can go public with this. But then I will be very happy to share everything that came out of this project as a toolkit for assessing the teacher's competence. But even apart from that, there have been projects already about the digital competences of teachers, about the competences when it comes to student-centered teaching and learning. And these batteries, these items are already out there, so they can already be worked with.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now I see a couple of questions here. On what point should teachers be evaluated? Is there a standard? Again, partly this is what the performance project tries to resolve, but the other thing goes back to my main message in this input. I'm highly doubtful if there needs to be a standard, because in different disciplines, on different levels for education, in different countries, you will have different things that you find important in terms of quality. Yeah, if your pedagogical model is about problem-based learning, then how well the teacher is dealing with this pedagogy needs to be part of the evaluation. If your institution is completely free about didactics and pedagogy, then why evaluate the effectiveness of pedagogy anyway? Because that means it's very difficult to compare apples and pears. So I think it leads back to the question I was posing at the beginning, and that I will also have for you in the last part. We need to be sure, all of us or all of our institutions, what is it that we found important or find important when it comes to quality? There shouldn't be a universal battery out there. I fully think there shouldn't. And even with performance, I've been always arguing, let's make it like a broad range of things that we can offer, but not one standardized instrument. And then the institutions or the teachers themselves pick what they think is relevant for their context. I'm a big believer in contextual differences. Good. My suggestion for now would be, if you agree, we take another 5 to 10 minute break, because that was very intense, and then come back together again for my last half an hour with you. And this will only be input if you ask me for input. But if we take a short break now, everyone can also rethink things again. And please use the break, because I'm going to make you work again after the break.
Thank you, Professor Vittori. So I think we can have 5 to 10 minutes break. Then, as you said, with a fresh idea, we can continue. So in 10 minutes is okay?
Perfect, 10 minutes. So let's make it, what is it? 3:15, would that be all right? That's 8 minutes, but then we start at 3:15?
Okay, perfect, 3:15 then. Assalomu alaykum. Davom ettiramiz. Professor Vittoriy biz bilan. Yo'q hali. Tadbir ishtirokchilariga yana bir bor eslatmoqchi edim. Mikrofonlar faollashtirib, fikrlaringizni bildirishingiz mumkin yoki savollaringizni bildirishingiz mumkin hamisha. Xo'sh. Marhamat professor, davom ettirishingiz mumkin.
Good. Thank you, Kurakan. So before I go into my final exercise, and for this I wanted to give you a couple of minutes. Are there any new questions related to the quality indicators that have come up during the break? And of course, we can stay in contact afterwards, but it's always easier to do it while we're still all here. So if there is anything you feel this would be helpful for you or your work, please don't hesitate to ask it now. All right, good, because if not, then I'll come to my, there is a question or a comment? All right, thank you. Good. Then I'll make you work one last time. And you might remember yesterday when we were talking about this activating students. Now, of course, you know students, but I think it would be, for me, but also for Kudrakon and for Aziza, it would be good to have your answers to 2 questions. And this would be the final thing that I would like to do with you. If we were doing this minute paper ourselves, just think about what, and this goes for the 2 days, not just for today. What is the one thing that you remember and think you will remember? So in a way, what is the one thing that was a surprise for you in these 2 days of workshop or something that you learned? It doesn't need to be really a learning, but what is the one thing that from those 2 days you think you will take away with you that is something that you can benefit from, something that you will remember? That is my first question. And I know it requires some thinking, but that's what it's all about. It is all about thinking. And in this case, I won't be satisfied with just 5, 8, or 10. There's more than 70 people in the room, so I need at least 1 or 2 dozen. And the second question is there a particular question? I think that would be also important for your Leo and Erasmus Plus. Is there a particular question after those 2 days that you feel this would be a question you would like to get answers for sometime in the future? And seeing what those questions are you still have will help me to understand what has worked in this workshop and what not, and will also help me to understand what you need, and it will help Kudrakon and Aziza to understand what you will need in the future. So please, those 2 questions, and please again type them in the chat. I think it's easier to collect it like this. What is the one thing you are going to take away with you? And what is the most pressing question that's still open for you? And I'll just turn off my camera so you don't have the feeling I'm watching you while you're typing or anything. This should be done in your own time, but please indulge me and indulge the organizers by trying to come up with questions, So you seem to be giving that some very, very deep thoughts. Please type in the chat whenever you feel ready to type, and you can type it again in English, in Uzbek and Russian, don't worry. If you're writing, the organizers are going to think there has been nothing that you were taking away with, but on the positive side, they think all your questions are resolved and you never need a seminar again. Now impressions are coming in. Thank you very much. It's always good having people breaking the ice. Good. While you're still typing, and now you see that my patience, after all, is limited. I can't stand the silence for too long. Please continue typing. I don't want to interrupt you, but I was also promising you to provide or to share with you an idea on collaborative teaching and not just collaborative learning. I did this earlier this morning, and what we realized in our own institution is that we kind of punish the teachers who teach in a team. How do we punish them? Because in our context, you get paid by the contact hours you have with the students in a way. But if you share a class, if you share a classroom, then usually this means you get only half of the remuneration, only half of the payment, because you teach together with someone else. And we realized 2 years ago that this is not fair, because as much as students need to learn together and do some collaboration, we also need teachers across disciplines, across different fields to work together and do the teaching. So what we started 2 years ago, we started to develop a process with new rules for real team teaching. So we defined some scenarios where we think it's a benefit if teachers teach together. And then we also started to change the remuneration scheme for them. So now, if we now have two teachers from different fields working together for the same classroom, and not in a way that one of them is there on Monday and the other there is Tuesday, but really doing things together, the teaching, the preparation, the assessment, they don't get just half of the workload allotted, they get more. So we changed the key about that. So even if it's a 2-hour classroom, a two contact hour classroom, in a way, the sum of hours we distribute among the teachers is not 2, it's more. And why I'm sharing this example with you is because I do believe in order to deal with the challenges ahead of us in the future, and also realizing the big challenges you have ahead of you in Uzbekistan regarding the agenda I saw, we will need to be a bit more innovative to realize how we can get there. And sometimes, and that's also closing the circle to what I told you yesterday, sometimes it's not about breaking the rules, but it's about finding out where we should bend the rules in order to get to a better result and to a clearer picture at the end. This is the one thing I still had promised this morning that I wanted to share. But I also realized that this was keeping you again from typing. No new messages have appeared. So please continue to do so. And Gurukhan, I think there's worse things that could happen than ending a bit early on a Friday. So I guess you will also have a feedback process of your own. I'm handing back to you. I would be happy to read more comments on the chat, but I also realize it's Friday afternoon and everyone would like to come to a close, so I'm happy to call it a day for now if you are.
Yes, we will collect the feedback from our participants after this meeting. Hopefully they will share their ideas, and if questions they will contact individually. I will switch to Uzbek. Demak, barcha ishtirokchilarimizdan iltimos qilar edik, agar fikrlaringiz bo'ladigan bo'lsa, savollaringiz bo'ladigan bo'lsa, hozir ham yozishingiz mumkin. Yoki mana bizda so'rovnoma bor. Men hozir bu so'rovnoma bilan o'rtoqlashaman. Xo'sh. Chatda so'rovnomaga bizda Google'da shakllantirilgan so'rovnomaga lavhani qoldirdim. Sizlardan iltimos o'z fikrlaringiz bilan o'rtoqlashsanglar. Va bizni Erasmus Plus ofisimizni kontaktlari barchangizda bor. Oxirgi yuborilgan xatda keltirilgan. Agar yana qo'shimcha fikrlar bo'ladigan bo'lsa, keyingi tadbirlarimizda nimalarni e'tiborga olishimiz kerakligi haqida fikrlar bo'ladigan bo'lsa, fikr berishingizni so'raymiz. Biz aniq bilmaydigan sabablarga ko'ra bugun ishtirokchilarimiz faolligi juda ham yaxshi bo'lmadi. Ayniqsa oxirgi qismida. Demak, bizda juda ham kam fikrlar olindi ishtirokchilarimizdan. Shu o'rinda xo'sh, bizda demak kecha ham mana shu so'rovnomani o'tkazgandik, uni natijalari bilan ham o'rtoqlashamiz. Bu tadbirimizni demak barcha ma'lumotlarini biz veb-saytimizda chop etamiz, ya'ni professorimiz biz bilan o'z taqdimotlari bilan o'rtoqlashadilar va shu taqdimotlari albatta veb-saytimizda qo'yamiz. Yuqoriroqda kecha ham ahamiyat qilgan bo'lsangiz kerak, bizni professorimiz o'z emaillari bilan ham o'rtoqlashdi. Agar sizlarda qandaydir savollar bo'ladigan bo'lsa yoki boshqa fikrlar bo'ladigan bo'lsa, ular bilan ham bog'lanish imkoniyati bor. Ayni vaqtda ham agar takliflar, mulohazalar bo'ladigan bo'lsa, o'z mikrofonlaringizni yoqib fikr bildirishingiz mumkin. Bemalol. O'ylaymanki, boshlang. Xo'sh, demak, mana professorimiz ham o'z fikrlarini yozibdilar. Qolganlardan ham fikrlarni olyapmiz. Shu o'rinda professor Vitoriga alohida tashakkur bildiramiz. Qimmatli vaqtlarini ayamasdan biz bilan birgalikda bo'lib, bugungi tadbirimizni juda ham yuqori darajada o'tkazishda ko'mak berdilar. Shu bilan birga professor Gulchehra Shavkatovaga alohida rahmat taqdimotlari uchun. Oliy ta'lim tizimida bo'layotgan islohotlar haqida aytib berdilar. Va shu bilan birgalikda tarjimonlarimizga katta rahmat. Ular ham fikrlarni aniq qilib, biz aytayotgan fikrlarni demak ingliz tilida, rus tilida, o'zbek tilidan tarjima qilib berishdi. Xo'sh, bizda hali ham vaqtimiz bor. Agar kimda kim fikr bildiraman desa yoki bironta savollari bo'ladigan bo'lsa, bemalol mikrofonlarini yoqib fikr bildirishingiz mumkin. Marhamat. O'ylaymanki bizda bu nima bilan bog'liq bo'lganini bilmadim-u, lekin ayni kecha va bugun bo'layotgan ob-havoni ta'siri ham bo'lishi mumkin. Professor bilan o'rtoqlashishni xohlardim. Bizda hozir juda ham muammoli ob-havo bo'lyapti. Ya'ni juda ham ko'p chang ko'tarilgan. O'ylaymanki aksariyat ishtirokchilarimiz uylaridan ishtirok etayotgan bo'lishlari mumkin va balki ayrimlarda imkoniyat yo'qdir, ayrimlarda xohish yo'qdir.
It's perfectly fine. I don't, and I do believe it has a lot to do with Zoom and this online format. Yeah, the bigger something is in Zoom, so and a lot of people were contributing. For me, it would just be important if you feel it had something to do with the content or the way it was presented. I'd really appreciate you to provide this in the feedback. So if you feel a different way would have been able to activate you more, that's important for me as a feedback, because otherwise others are going to suffer the same way you had to suffer in other workshops. And that's something we can collaboratively avoid. Good. But with this again, I know it's shortly before the weekend, so I'm happy, and I'm also happy to hear from you, Gudrakon, in the near future about the feedback.
Katta rahmat. Albatta yuqori baholaymiz bu kecha va bugun bo'lgan tadbirni. Biz shu davrga qadar 10 dan ortiq mana shunday seminarlarni tashkil etganmiz. Va albatta ta'kidlashimiz joiz, offline shaklda, ya'ni 100% shaklda amalga oshirilgan seminarlarimiz juda ham samarali bo'lgan. Afsuski mana bu holat, ya'ni onlayn shaklda bo'layotgan tadbirlarimiz ozgina muammolar keltirib chiqaryapti va mana bugungi holatni ham ko'rishimiz mumkin. Bunda bir qancha faktorlar borligini bilib turibmiz, lekin shu bilan birgalikda ishonch bilan ayta olamizki, bugungi va kechagi tashkil etilgan tadbirimiz ishtirokchilar uchun juda ham foydali bo'ldi. Sifat haqidagi, ya'ni sifatni muhimligi va buni qanday qilib amalga oshirish, qaysi ko'rsatkichlarni e'tiborga olish haqida biz o'ylaymizki, barcha ishtirokchilarimiz o'zlariga tegishli bilimlari shakllantirib olishdi. Va bugun agar ularda fikrlar shakllanmagan bo'lsa, savollar shakllanmagan bo'lsa, o'zlarining faoliyatlari davomida keyinchalik biz bilan yoki to'g'ridan to'g'ri professorimiz bilan bog'lanib masalalarni hal qilish imkoniyati bo'ladi. Mana bu yerda ham kommentariylar bo'lyapti. Juda ham mazmunli taqdimot va professorga katta rahmat. Shu bilan birgalikda biz vazirlikka alohida tashakkur bildiramiz. Mana shu tadbirimizni tashkillashtirishda juda ham yaqindan ko'mak berishdi va barcha ishtirokchilarga qimmatli vaqtlarini ayamasdan ishtirok etganlari uchun katta rahmat. Tadbir ma'lumotlari, ya'ni prezentatsiya, taqdimotlar bizni veb-saytimizdan olishingiz mumkin bo'ladi. E'tiboringiz uchun katta rahmat.
Take care, everyone. Thank you. Have a great weekend. Gudrakon, special thank you to you again. Thank you.
Katta rahmat. Salomat bo'ling.